So the next session is on succession planning, and I think it's one that's really important to all of us. I know personally at Paderma, my own pool, it's important to me and has been important historically for a couple of reasons. I have 5 senior managers that report to me, and in the last 5 years, I have replaced 4 of them due to retirements. I'm going to replace the 5th one in the next 12 months due to retirement as well. I also have a 7-member board, and in the time that I've been the CEO, all 7 of those members have turned over. Now, I can tell you that we got through it. Can I tell you that it was pretty all the time or that it was smooth as it could have been? No. And that's what this morning is going to be about, the kickstart for us to move in that direction. So we also know, that's my pool. We also know from the AGRiP 2018 Executive Compensation Survey that by 2028, so that's just 8 years from now, 75% of the executives are going to turn over. So think about it. If you're at a table with 4 executives, 3 of the 4 of you are going to be gone in the next 8 years. I think that's pretty staggering for all of us to kind of put our hands around and realize. That's why I think it's really important for succession planning to be a priority for us. But part of the challenge that we all have is making the time to make it a priority. And if we do make it a priority, then the real challenge is how do we actually take that down into something that's practical, something that's tactical, and something that's useful. Those are the challenges that we all have. And that's why I'm really proud to introduce our 2020 succession planning resident, Steve Trautman. So Steve is the principal and founder of the Steve Trautman Company, a group of global experts in talent risk management and solutions. So Steve's company has been around for 20 plus years, helping organizations of all kinds with their talent management and succession planning process and helping transfer critical knowledge to new team members. He's also found time to write 3 books, one of which is Do You Have Who It Takes? Managing Talent in a High-Stakes Technical Workplace. All year, we'll see Steve as part of AGRiP. So he's going to be our resident. We'll see him at the CEO Institute this summer. And we'll also see him in varying other aspects of AGRiP in different contexts throughout the year. Please help me in welcoming Steve Trautman, our 2020 Succession Planning resident.
Thanks, Brett. Appreciate it. Wow, good morning, everybody. I'm really glad to be here. It's super fun to be able to begin the process of working with you on this succession planning residency. When Anne talked to me about this event, she said by the end of the residency, you're going to be a big fan of pooling. Because of course I knew absolutely nothing about you, and she's right. Just getting the chance to sit and listen to the work that you're doing yesterday, the folks I've talked to on the phone in preparation to get started here has been really, really interesting, and it'll be a pleasure to help you think about this along the way. The topic is familiar to everybody. It's succession planning. But I want you to set aside the notion of a plan that feels and looks like a document that gets dusted off once a year or less, hauled into the board. It's sort of a chore. And I want you to pop up a level and do what you do best, which is think about risk, right? Let's think about succession planning more in the form of talent risk management. Think of it as continuity management, and I think that'll help us to break through some of the kind of common ways that we think about and talk about succession planning. Why? It's obvious. You, as board members, are working every day in the organizations that your pool serves, and your higher purpose as a pool and as the board governing a pool is to make sure that those schools and counties and municipalities and special districts have the support that you provide at hand every single time without fail. And so if we think about this notion of succession planning as continuity management and talent risk management, then we have an opportunity to think more broadly about it. So whether you're a very small pool in Ohio or a giant pool in California or Texas, whether you're regulated or not, whether you're part of an association or not, Whether you've already replaced your CEO and you're sitting smugly back going, not our deal, but I'm going to watch all the other people squirm, or whether you've got that right in front of you and you're slightly more uncomfortable than you would like to be this exact minute, whoever you are, however big you are, wherever you sit, you can think about continuity management. And you can think about talent risk management. And so I'd like to spend a little bit of time doing on that. We're also going to talk over the course of the residency about knowledge transfer. And I want you to know that in my career of thinking about knowledge transfer, my clients are all kind of, they do some of the darndest things. And I want to tell you a couple stories about them so you can start to see how to think about this issue. One of the people I worked with is a guy named Malcolm, and he is the guy who is famous for he works for a confectionery company, chocolate company. His job is to pick the sugar for the next chocolate or biscuit or gummy that the company is going to do. So they call him the sugar guy, and Malcolm was going to retire. And so the question is, now what are we going to do? Because Malcolm for 25 years has been the guy who picked the sugar. And the reason why he's relevant to you is because when we dug in on what he actually did, we found that his work was actually a lot like the work that your folks do. So he had to have a deep understanding of the regulatory environment around glucose syrups. And he had to know what was going on in the marketplace. He had to worry about whether or not the people that he made promises to him would actually deliver, so that he could be sure that the supply chain would be ready for the next product as it came down the path. And he had a lot of relationships. And the real reason why he was incredibly successful, one of the many reasons, was because of the relationships that he managed. He also did site visits, and he had to walk through a building and see and smell and hear things that kind of raised his spidey sense a little bit and got him thinking about what was going to happen there. And so when we deconstructed the work of the sugar guy, and we took a careful kind of task level analysis of what he did, we were able to replicate his secret sauce and prepare people to fill his slot with no breaking continuity, and with really only 6 or 8 weeks to do that. So I want you to know that the work that you do is complicated, and it is broad, and it is critical, but it's also explicable. We really can talk about it, we can think about it, and we can make a plan to make it happen. I want to tell one other story. This is a story about a guy who ran an Army base. It's not the kind that has tanks and stuff. It's a research and development facility, so all of his folks were engineers and scientists. And he was leaving after 25 years. And the same scenario, lots of relationships. In fact, when we broke down the tasks and the skills for Bob, we found that one of his skills was to attend the general's cocktail party. Okay? So that meant that he had to know who to talk to, who to stand next to, what questions to ask. And as a result of he had to know how to call the senator, another skill that he had that was explicable. And in both cases, the point of that work, in addition to managing very technical people who were inventing gear that soldiers wear into battle, in addition to leading the research and the development that would bring safety to warfighters, he also had to be a very political animal. And that work that he did, we were able to deconstruct and talk about it and think about it and find people to fill those slots. So many, many, many stories I can tell, but I just want you to have confidence that what you're doing is familiar, even though I've never heard of a pool before, and that we'll be able to come up with some good ideas for you. The data that's on this slide has been repeated, I'm going to say 7 times since I got here yesterday morning. And so you know it. And it is, people call it the silver tsunami. Brett just gave a great, he said, his story is exactly the story that everybody feels and knows. And so the thing I want to interrupt a little bit is the idea that the real problem here is that everybody's old, okay? It's not even legal to talk about how old people are. Did you know that? It's not even legal. And guess what? It doesn't help when you say, oh, we'll just keep him here. She's not going to leave. We're not going to let her go. That doesn't help at all. And it also doesn't help one bit when you ask an executive, how long are you staying, Mike? And Tracy, how long are you going to be here? And they say, I'm good for a few more years. Doesn't matter what they say. Doesn't matter. A lot of them are liars, right? Can't trust them. And this is important, really important, because if you're sitting there, as I mentioned earlier, being one of those smug folks who's got it covered because you've got a 40-something CEO, that's not your job. Your job is not to find out how old they are. Your job is to ensure that if they left tomorrow, for any reason, you would have a plan. You would know what steps you're going to take. And you would. And we worked with a nuclear plant years ago where they hired all these younger people to be the successors to all the older people. And guess who left first? Right? And so just know that as a board of directors with a real critical responsibility to maintain continuity in your organization, you have to answer the questions that I'm going to pose to you today. And you're thinking about it at all levels of the organization, not just the top level. We are going to worry about whether we cross that line that every board talks about, every CEO is worried about, but we're not going to let that be an excuse to be ignorant or complacent, because none of that's going to help you at all. We also have to look in this issue about, as Brett mentioned, we have to talk about board longevity and the fact that many of you are facing succession planning and you're talking about succession planning for your CEO, but you're a little bit blind to what's going on in the board itself. And so I'm going to give you some ideas today that we'll talk about CEO succession. That's certainly the main focus. But the ideas are equally valuable for second-tier departures, as Brett experienced, and also board departures, that piece of the puzzle as well. Here's the meta question that I want everybody to be able to answer. Do you have the right people in the right places with the right skills to execute on your plan to provide continuity in the 1 to 3 year window? And this is a question that you, as board members, are going to ask your CEO. And then you're going to expect more than a shrug, or more than a we feel pretty good, or more than it's okay, I think we're all right. I've been thinking about this and I've looked around and it's all right. You should be able to ask for data. You should be able to ask for, to dig in a little bit on it. I sat through the generative thinking presentation yesterday. This is generative thinking. This is thinking beyond what does the staff say. If the staff is okay, we're okay. And so answering this question in plain language will give you insight into whether or not you can be good. You can feel good about your role as a board member, remembering, of course, that you're as concerned as a member yourself as you are as a board member to make sure that there's real continuity here. So how do you know that you're doing enough? How do you know that you're doing enough as a board to ensure continuity and to reduce talent risk? How do you know if the relationships that need to be supported, need to be managed with your reinsurers are going to have continuity? How do you know if the relationships that your regulators, that allows you to manage your regulators, is going to be important? How do you know if the member relationships are going to help you continue to compete for those of you who have a highly competitive environment? And then some of the very basic questions. How do you know that the money is going to get moved, or that the data will go to the actuary for the actuarial report? You should be able to answer all those questions. You should know that there's an answer to all those questions. And as I was listening and thinking about how important especially the relationships are, I think one of the questions we want you to be able to answer is, who cares if the CEO leaves? Who cares? And that's a literal question. So if you had to make a list of the names of the people who need to get a phone call and be comforted and reassured that everything is going to go smoothly, do you have that list already? And do you know who would make that call and who would have help instill confidence that everything is going to be just fine? And so that the relationships are often a piece of the puzzle. And in knowledge transfer, we talk a lot about how do you transfer knowledge on something so human and so personal as a relationship. And we can dive in deep on that as we have time. So why is it so hard to just do this, right? Why is it so difficult? And I think especially when you sit on the board, you have visibility. You have a little bit of visibility as a board member into what's going on in the pool because you're effectively clients of the pool. You know, you'll have one of them working with you to adjust a claim, or somebody else will do a site visit. So you have visibility into the people who serve the pool. But that is, and that's one of the ways in which you can see them. And then the other way is you see them through budgets, and you see them through tenure and things like that. But really it's tricky because, and I call it the technical fog, there's this layer between you and them that makes it difficult to really know who they are and what they do. And so one of the things I like to think about is what are we doing to kind of cut through that fog and to make the work that people do, to make the effort that they put in more clear to everybody. And at this point, I want to give you one other big tip that I'm going to be pushing all year long. It's the idea that your succession plan is not a succession plan for a person, and it's not a succession plan for a title. At least not only that. So when somebody says we have a successor in place, I just want to know if that's enough, right? So we're going to talk about having a succession plan for the work. Okay, so at least two different groups that I spoke with yesterday talked about how their current CEO is kind of a magician. He or she can kind of do all these different things. You can put him in a cocktail party, you can put him in front of the regulators, you can put him in front of elected officials, you can put him in front of the actuaries, you can put him in front of the vendors that you're using to staff some of your, and they can handle kind of any of those situations. Are we really going to replace that magician with a mortal, with a normal human being who comes in from someplace else and does it? Maybe you'll get that lucky again. But especially if your pool has grown since that CEO took over, that CEO had to learn all those things because he or she had to solve all the problems in front of them while you were growing. But now you're of a certain size. Is it even practical? Does it make sense to have one person do all that work? So we're going to build succession plans that are by block of work. And this is going to demystify the magic that your CEOs do right now. And it's also going to help you make sure that you're developing people up into those slots, making sure that you have redundancy in all the right ways, regardless of whether or not you're filling the slot. So we just did a project for a client, a CEO who runs, or senior vice president who runs for a big printer company. They run, so there was a guy named Mal, and Mal had been there 35 years, and he was one of those people that everybody talks about. We don't really know what he does, but we're pretty sure if he stops, we're all gonna die, right? And so Mal every year would try to retire. He's already 67 years old. He had things he wanted to do. Like he basically wanted the next season of his life to be available to him. But he's a company man and he loved his people and he didn't want to leave anybody in a lurch. So just a really good person. He would get a call from Tokyo once a year saying, please don't leave us. That guy. And so they had a successor in line for him. named Francis, and they ran it kind of like a family business. I think even though it was a giant multinational company, you would recognize the words they were using and the stuff. So they're like, basically I got a call from the head of HR, and he said, we love Francis. Francis is our guy. He's been here for 7 years, really bright. We really think he can take over for Mal, but we're also very worried he'll fail. We're very worried that he's going to fail. And because we love Francis, we don't want him to fail, and we want to figure out what we could do to reduce the risk that he'll fail. And so we looked at Mal, and we thought about what he does, and we broke it down into the blocks of work. He would work on design projects, and he would work on projecting the market for the German market for the printer product, and he would go and do sales pitches and close $1 million deals over dinner. So that's not the same, that's a very broad set of things. And so each one of those blocks of work had to be replaced so that Mal could go do something else, get on with his life. And so when we did the analysis and we looked at where Mal worked, we found for sure 100% that Francis would fail, okay? He wouldn't fail in some areas, but if we gave him the whole job, he was gonna fail for sure. And so we just didn't give him the whole job. We gave him the title, we gave him the responsibility for most of the people, and we gave him a couple of the blocks of work where he was certainly going to be successful. And then we carefully and thoughtfully carved off the rest of the work and gave it to other people who were well suited to that work and could be successful. And by doing that methodically and carefully and thoughtfully over the course of a week, it's not a complicated process, we were able to get Mal to transfer his knowledge to Francis where Francis was going to take over, and then transfer his knowledge to other people where they could be successful. And if you listen to the logic in that, it makes a lot of sense. Made sense to them in 5 minutes, makes sense to you already. And so you can start thinking that way today. And oh, by the way, guess what? A whole group of very top, high performers got opportunities to learn from Mal, right? They got opportunities to build skills working with the man, right, in the best possible way. So it was also a great retention opportunity and a great way to grow talent in that operation. And even if you have a very small pool, a handful of people and a few contractors, you can think this way as well. You can decide to grow your team in this way. All right, how are we going to do it? Today, I'm going to give you 5 questions. I want you to know that none of these questions is academic. I'm the most practical person you will ever meet. I no fluffy anything. Let's figure out what the problem is, let's write it down, and let's solve it. I think I'm just like you, right? You're practical, you don't mess around, you want to box it up and fix it. Because if you do that, then you're going to reduce the payout, or you're going to reduce the number of people who get hurt, or all the above. So these questions are questions that you as a board of directors should be asking your CEO, and then you as a CEO should have a plain language answer to the question. And this is going to be several ways in which you can measure how far along you are in managing your talent risk and in ensuring continuity for the pools you serve. Okay? First question. How do we know, how can we be sure that the strategy and the vision that is clear in the CEO's head is also clear in the heads of the people who have to execute it, which is your front line? Now remember, I don't care if they're employees, I don't care if they're contractors, I don't care if they sit in your office every day, I don't care if they're remote, I don't care how old they are. If they're working in your pool, they should be able to articulate the strategy that the executive is setting forth. And when I interviewed a couple of you, CEOs, and asked you what you wanted, I heard this come up at least twice. The idea that I wish I could have a conversation about strategy and vision with my board and get their support, not their control, don't want to step over the line, but get their support thinking about and ensuring that my vision for this organization, just where are we going to be 1 to 3 years from now, it's clear, and we're in agreement on it. And the complaint is that because your board meetings have to fall into that 2-hour slot with a tight agenda and get as many decisions done as possible, the complaint is that there's not time to have this conversation, and that leaves something lacking. And so if you're thinking about continuity and talent risk management and your CEO is plucked away, but your CEO is good, then you don't want the vision to leave with the person. You want the strategy and the vision to be already integrated into every single person who's working in the program. Well, here's the problem. Strategy, blah, blah, blah. Vision, blah, 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 right? What the heck are you talking about, right? And so I want to give you a practical way to talk about it, because you have a day job, you are busy, you can't sit around and stare at your navel and discuss and expect this conversation to happen in a soft way. It needs to be pretty practical. So I want to give you an answer to the first question, not just the question. I call these the big picture measures of alignment, and I'll start by explaining the notion of what I mean by this, and then I'll show you the questions. Have you ever worked with somebody who gets the big picture? Do you know how awesome that is, and how valuable it is to have people who really get it? You think about yourself on the spectrum, you're probably somebody who really gets it. Have you ever worked with or maybe even fired somebody who just did not get the big picture? I mean, they just don't get it. It's a problem, right? And everybody can kind of go, yeah, I know. And then I ask you, what the hell's the big picture? Right? What is it really? Because everybody talks about it, and then people go, well, it's right? Same thing with strategy, same thing with vision, right? It's this nod and smile kind of opportunity for everybody to go, yeah, well, yeah, of course. And so what I want to do is I want to say there is a measure of getting the strategy, getting the vision, getting the big picture. There is a very crisp measure. And the measure is that people can answer a handful of questions and sound like their boss and their peers. So in the smaller pools, that means everybody sounds alike, because you're all basically sitting in the same room or the same set of offices. In the larger pools and the ones that are regionally diverse, this is even more important and harder, but still equally measurable. So the measure again is, if you can answer some questions and sound like your boss and your peers, then you get the big picture, and the converse is also true. So here's a fun opportunity for you as a board member to have conversations with staff that are appropriate for a board member to do. You could ask the answers to these questions, and you can expect a crisp answer. And if that makes any CEO in here uncomfortable, I'm like, that's because you're not sure your people can answer these questions. So get sure about that, and then let's see what happens. So the questions are not complicated, and again, they're not academic. There is an answer. I recommend writing the answer, because if you can't write it down, you're still fooling yourself that you're being clear. And then make sure it makes sense to at least a couple other people who are not you, and you'll do this. So I do this as part of my practice, and it is an interesting conversation. It gives everybody an opportunity to think and work clearly about this. So the first one is just a simple question about purpose. What's the purpose of our pool? And I don't think anybody here will have any trouble with that one, so I'm going to move right on. The next one is about products and services. So what is it we do? If we were writing a brochure for our services, which many of you have, what is on there? And again, plain language is really important, but here's a twist. Can you talk about which service is more important? Can you talk about which service matters more? And is there ever a time when one of your employees shows that they don't get the big picture by emphasizing one service over another one in the wrong way? They get it backwards. People who come from traditional insurance might have these kinds of problems. They're doing the wrong thing first. So we make a simple list, and then we try to put them in order. We make them uncomfortable. We talk about how uncomfortable it is to put them in order, because they're all really important. And then we discuss that disconnect that we feel sometimes when we're pressured by taking one of our services over another one. The next question is, who's our customer? It's phrased slightly differently, but it's who do we serve? And so being able to say that. Now, do you have more than one customer? Say yes. And is any one of those customers more important than the other customers? Is the elected official more important, or is the fireman more important? So when you think about that and you make a list of the people you serve and you recognize that they're not all created equal, and then you think about one of your frontline employees who's been with you for 3 months and the phone rings and they have to pick up a call and take care of somebody first, who do they take care of first? And it's a really valuable dialogue, because when you listen to your people talk and they say, I take care of the elected official first because they're the most scary, right? Or they have the most power. And that might be accurate, and it also might be dead wrong. And so that's the work. Competitors, some of you don't face a tight competitive market, but how many of you would say competition matters in your world? So I'm seeing like half the hands go up. How often do you talk about your competitors? Which competitors are doing something you should be learning from? Which competitors should you ignore completely? So again, we make a simple list and we talk about it. This gives people so much insight into the marketplace that you face. A claims adjuster does care about this. They need to know about this because they need to know how they can help this pool remain solvent and continue to add members and provide services. Metrics are an equally important way, and the obvious one that you guys face is whether we measure how many claims we deny or how many claims we accept and serve. And so making sure that the list is clear and which one's in the right order. The history can be valuable to talk about where this pool came from and how long it's been in existence. And I always like to say the history lesson is just about how did we get here? Why are we like this? Why are we different sometimes than other organizations you might see? And then trends are interesting to talk about. And then finally, the priorities that you face. So can your people say the 3 ways they're helping your pool succeed on the vision that we talked about? What are they doing to help win, to help execute the vision, the strategy that's been put in place? And one of the issues, many of you have very long-tenured employees who might be just doing their job, and they're very good at executing. How often do they get a chance to pop up a level and think about the bigger picture? So that's what this does. So your charge, if you take this one up, is to ask these questions of your executive. And the executive, I'll tell you, you should be able to deliver a presentation that answers all these questions in 30 minutes. So don't kill me with a whole day anything, right? 1 slide per question and a 30-minute presentation. And then I can tell you for my company, I would never let an employee work for me for more than 5 days if I hadn't made sure they could answer all these questions. Because as soon as they're talking to one of my customers, as soon as they're learning about my business, I want them to have this backdrop to make great decisions and to prioritize well their energy and time. Okay, so that's the big picture. The second question I want to go through is just leans back to the idea that your succession plan isn't good enough if all it does is put people in boxes. It says, this is the person who will take the CEO slot. I want your succession plan to be broader than that. And this idea is to help you think that way. So what are the blocks of work that are higher risk, perhaps because they have less bench strength? So what are the blocks of work that will make or break our pool's continuity in the next couple of years? And so this is a tool we'll talk about at the CEO Institute, and we'll teach you how to use it. But for now, I'll just give you the concept, and you can start to chew on it right here while you're talking to your coworkers. The tool's called the Knowledge Silo Matrix, and it's a simple grid that starts by saying, who are the people that are part of the solution? Who are they? And their names go in the left-hand column. This should not be a hard part of the test. It's who reports to you, but it's also who works for you. And sometimes there'll be a board member on here. Sometimes there'll be a contractor on here, so often always the employees. And you might, if you're a big pool, you might have a couple of these for different departments, but if you're a little pool, it's going to be everybody. Average 18 people in a pool leadership, so there's plenty of room for 18 people in the left-hand column. Put them all in, see what happens. Part-time, full-time, don't care. Any humans, they belong on the left-hand side. Across the top, we're going to break out the work that those people do. And we call these knowledge silos. It's a block of work that takes a month to a year to learn. Hear that? A block of work that takes a month to a year to learn. So it's not a task, it's a chunk. And you'd say, she's my go-to person for claims, or he's my go-to person for underwriting, or she's the person who handles the vendor relations, or she's the person who handles member relations. So when you think about your go-to people, usually the silo they work in pops right out just like that. And so across the top, you're gonna make a list, 10, 12, 15, 20 tops, of all the silos that collectively allow you to maintain continuity. This is our work. This is the stuff we do. And I like to say every breath that one of you takes shows up in at least one of those silos. So it's really comprehensive. There should be nothing left aside, oh, that doesn't matter that much, or we've got that covered. Don't do that. Just say all the work that you do. So litigation management, reinsurance, property liability. You could do the products, property liability, for example. So you have the opportunity to just fill out the top with the blocks of work. Now, you're the CEO I'm talking to. The board's not going to do this. They don't have this visibility. But the board can ask for this analysis. They can say, who are your people and what do they do? Who does what work where? You can ask that as a board member, and the CEO can use this as a framework to communicate with you about where the talent is being utilized and also where the gaps lie. Then we're going to add in colors. So when I mark somebody purple, I'm going to use this again, so this one I want you to hear. Purple is a really important role. Purple is the person who sets the standard. They're the person who does the work the right way. And we need to know who is purple, who's setting the standard for that block of work so that we know who's lined up behind that person. Green is the people who are sufficiently consistent with the purple. They're good to go. Sufficiently consistent. Sometimes that means lockstep. Sometimes it means in the neighborhood. Okay, so that's okay. Yellow means you're learning. Not bad to be yellow. It's good. Means you're growing. Bad to stay yellow. Okay, so we want you to grow and get to green. Get to a place where you can do the work. White's a really important color. As people, if you have a CEO who has already announced his retirement, and you are working them out of a job, that's a really good idea. The color white means they stop working. Okay? It's no longer your job. Somebody has got that covered. And when I do that in my company, I can't wait. I'm going to just work myself out of a job, and I'm going to put people into the slot. And when somebody calls me and asks me to help with a site visit, I'm going to say, done. Who was it Tom said? I've got two piles of stuff I don't care about anymore and the stuff I'm leaving for my successor. Fantastic. I totally love that. So that's what white means. It means I'm out of the business of doing that silo. I'm going to take off my save the world hat and I'm going to let it happen without me. I'm going to let it happen. If anybody dies, I'm still sitting right here to help them, but the odds are, because they're great people, really smart, really capable, they'll be just fine. And we're all going to use this tool to say, you know, when it's your day to be done, let's block that out, which might be months before you actually depart. This is a way to test and maintain continuity because you're not so worried about it. And the last color is red for risk. And so this is the place you can talk about the silos you're worried about and the people you're worried about. And then you can prioritize the risk. You can say, this is the one we're fixing. So imagine a conversation, a very quick conversation where the CEO says, here's my talent risk profile. I'll answer any questions you have about it, but I want you to know there's two silos I'm worried about. I've got people going from yellow to green. Here's the people. If you want to meet them, I can tell you. If you want to know what I'm teaching them, I can tell you. But here's my risk profile. And the CEO can present that in 5 minutes, literally. And then, but the generative conversation will be you as a board asking more questions. So tell me what they're learning. Tell me who they're learning from. How much of that is being documented? What's been hard? You can ask questions that will dig into the meat of it and educate your board as a result of it. So that's the opportunity that presents itself, is the ability to say, what are the blocks of work that you're worried about, as opposed to which job titles are you worried about? Good. So that's called the Knowledge Silo Matrix, and we'll work with you to make that available so that you can think this way if that's helpful to you. Third question. Who is purple? What's purple? Purple, remember, is the person who sets the standard, the person who's doing it the right way. Who's purple for culture in your organization? How much does culture matter in the delivery of your services? Based on what I've seen over the last 24 hours, it's like the heart of it. It matters more than anything. You have to get the process right, but you have to know the intent. You have to be clear about it, and you have to be able to work that way. So purple, who's purple for culture? Now, if the CEO is purple for culture, which wouldn't surprise me, a little worried, a little scary if it's not true, then you have some work to do in replacing that person. And so who's green? Who's already living the culture? Who's already sufficiently consistent with the standards set by the existing CEO? Who's yellow? Who's learning? And who's stuck at yellow? That's a question. And then what are you going to do about that? So remember that culture is another word that gets thrown around so much, and everybody nods and smiles and does that big thing. But really, culture is just the way we do things around here. Culture is just the way we do things around here. So we should be able to talk about it that way. We should be able to say even who's culture for claims, who's purple for culture for member services. We should be able to talk that way, and we should be able to look at a person and say, oh, good, that's great. Now, does the board care about culture? Are you concerned about whether there's continuity of culture? When we lose a long-tenured leader, this is one of the biggest things we're looking for, because this is going to make a big difference on retention of the rest of the team. If the culture is retained, then the executive floats away and nobody knows they're gone. That's a good measure. So who's going to hold that together? And my guess is you won't have any trouble finding, because of the nature of your work, I don't think you're going to have any trouble finding them, but don't let that be okay. Like, I'm sure it's fine. Just ask the question and then see what happens. It gives you a way to talk about it and think about it. Oh, one more thing I got, Anne gave me a great idea on this one, and so I'll share it with you. She said, if you ever interact with the CEO and you get a real sense of the culture, and then you interact with staff, for example, because they do some work for you as a member, and you see a disconnect in the culture, you disconnect in the vocabulary, disconnect in the focus, disconnect in the big picture. And this is a really good way to think about it and talk about it. That is something that you can talk about and discuss with the CEO, is what you've observed in the field, and discuss that in a way that gives them something to work on together. All right. The next question is about making sure you have continuity relative to your staffing model. And maybe you're already making the leap on this, that you're hearing me say, I just don't care if the people who are working are onshore or offshore, local or remote, or employed or contracted. But the reason why I left the question up here and wanted to make sure I said it out loud is because I met more than a couple of you who have, I think 25% of you have a fully outsourced model. And so there was this, people got very comfortable saying, well, we need a succession plan, but we've got Sedgwick. So Sedgwick has they bought a bunch of companies and they got a bunch of really smart people. And in fact, when we lost our CEO, Sedgwick had somebody there who had already worked for us in the past. And that was just so smooth and so easy. So we don't have to worry about succession planning that much. And I think that's awesome. First of all, if that is your plan, then that's okay. But I think it's a shallow answer to my question. And here's why. Because 75% of you are going to retire in the next 8 years. The country is at full employment. The talent pool that's available to take jobs is, the gravity of all that is equal for the outsourced partners that work for you as it is for you. They're not immune to all those challenges. They're living with those challenges too. So as a board, on a regular basis, you should be talking to your outsourced partner and asking the exact same questions. Don't say, we've outsourced it, we're fine. Say, you are our outsourced partner. We rely on you for continuity to our members. How can you give me confidence, prove to me, show me data that you know the work that we do and you have a backup plan for the critical silos that are going to be required? And asking that question, talking with them, and I suspect you'll get a great answer. I'm not suggesting they're not going to give you a great answer. I'm just saying, don't settle for less than a complete answer to that question, regardless of how it's been in the last cycle. And this is another important point. This notion of succession planning for you can't be just, we're doing a plan delivered by our outsourced partner, or we're doing a plan that's like the one I did at my public entity that I work in on my day job. And it's not like the one that I talked about at the conference from one of our other pool colleagues. It has to be unique to your organization, and you have this deep responsibility as a governing body to be able to ask those questions. All right, one more question. Let's talk a little bit about the governing body itself, the board itself. And let's make sure that you are looking as closely at the skills and abilities of your board as you are the staff itself. Somebody told me it can take 3 to 4 years for a person who joins a board to become fully useful to the board. That's a horrifying possibility, if you ask me. How much damage could somebody who's unprepared do in 3 to 4 years of uninformed decisions? And also, how hard would it be to spend 3 or 4 years feeling like an idiot, feeling like you don't know what the heck is going on? How uncomfortable for everybody, right? And so you might borrow the knowledge silo matrix with the silos. You might borrow that from the CEO and then edit it for the board because, in fact, you do have some of the same issues, of course. You might do that. And if you do, you might find that there are some board-specific silos that you need to add in. And then let's look carefully at what you do to make sure your board is useful to the CEO and to the staff. Let's make sure you think carefully about whether or not just making decisions is enough. It's why I was enamored of the generative thinking presentation, because it asks more of you than you're maybe comfortable with at this moment and maybe currently doing. And thinking this way is more work, without a doubt. But it's not months of work per year, it's hours of work per year. And I think if you're looking for a way to improve the quality of your service to the pool, the big responsibility you have, this is one of the ways you can think about it. And I'll give you an example that I think is really current for everybody. I know that you're working toward, many of you are replacing the technology that you're using for services and operations management. And it's a big deal. This is core to your operations, right? You gotta make sure that it happens well. Now, some of you, maybe many of you, would be most comfortable deferring to the board and having the board come to you, before deferring to the staff, having the staff come to you with a plan that you simply accept. And that might work for many, many, many decisions. But in this case, I wonder about whether or not you should do more than that. More to make yourselves useful in these big decisions. So the idea would be that you would say, how technical, how informed, how capable should we as a board be in helping make an informed decision. And so the idea is that do we need to have a purple for technology on our board? Do we need to potentially rent a purple? You know, get a consultant or a contractor who can grow our board's capacity to help make this decision. One of the jobs I had after I left Microsoft early in my career was working for a software company, and the president was a sales guy and a real personable person, but he was running a software company. And there was this problem in that he would sell stuff we hadn't built yet. And we decided the real reason that was true is because he didn't have enough technical knowledge. And the developers who worked for me were angry with him, really angry with him. And they wanted him to grow his capacity to understand the actual business he was running versus just understanding the customer and the market that he was trying to serve. And I think that might be an issue that you face a little bit here. You know, the running of the pool versus serving the members. And so the metaphor that my boss gave us, and we used to kind of come to an understanding, was he said, the vice president said to me and to my team, he said, how many propellers does the president have to have on his beanie? How big a nerd does he have to be a useful president? If you have 4 propellers as an architect or a software developer, does he need 4 propellers? And the answer was, well, no. I mean, that's crazy, right? Is it 1? Is it 2? And what that led to was an actual conversation about the stuff that he needed to know. And it also led to a conversation about who was going to teach him that stuff, which is really a knowledge transfer conversation. And so if technical or systems knowledge is important for your board to be able to help make an informed decision, who is going to learn in that silo, and from whom are you going to learn? And certainly learning from the staff is a piece of the puzzle, but I think you have a responsibility to be a little bit broader than that, ask that question and look around. And so you're probably not going to add a person to your board who's going to have that bring this, but you can certainly bring advisors to your board who help you be thoughtful and make an informed decision. So, consider the responsibility you have. That technical silo is just one of them, but certainly your board has other silos that they need to work within and discuss and come up with. And I think holding yourselves accountable to having a broader standard will help. And then let's also look at that 3 to 4 year window and talk about getting it down to 6 months for a board member who only meets once a month for 2 hours to actually learn how to do their job a little bit faster so they could be a little bit more useful to their group. Okay, so my charge to you is to think about succession planning in the same way we look at Google Earth. Sometimes we think about it in the broadest possible ways, but there are times when we work on it that we need to sort of zoom in a little bit, the way you zoomed in on Google Earth. And ultimately, we have to figure out what's going on all the way down at the front line. Good. Thank you. I think I'll take some questions now, and then we'll do the table talk, or do you want to do the table? We have a couple minutes on my handy timer up here, and so if there's any questions you'd like to ask, I'd be happy to answer them. Please go to a microphone if you don't mind, so that everybody can hear your question. Did I say anything that made you angry or poked at you a little bit? Anything that didn't sound real or true? I love the questions that are like, I think you're full of it, Trautman. I'm not sure anything that whole thing, it's not going to work for us. Give me a chance to hear that concern and address it as part of this work. That's all good.
I had to leave the room for a conference call, so apologies if I missed if you covered this already. But My question is, how do you convince your governing boards or your top officials that that this needs the time and attention that it clearly does? Like, how do you get them there if you're there and your other senior managers are there, but they're not there?
Yeah. So you're a CEO or a staff member?
I'm not nearly that important. I'm
Okay.
the HR director.
HR director. Okay, so HR director, but you're speaking for the pool employees, and the question about how do you get the staff or the board to spend any time on this? And that's so. My instinct is to say, what's their selfish motivation? Right? Why does anybody do anything? It's because it makes their life easier, it reduces the amount of time they have to spend, it allows them to spend less time solving stupid problems that make them crazy. They don't have to repeat some mistake and see it repeated again and again. And so my instinct is to say, start with labeling what you want. We'd like to spend some time on succession planning, and we'd like to also look at talent risk for the board. And then label the problems that come up as a result of it. How often is a meeting taken longer, or we haven't gotten through our agenda, or we've had a lapse in service, or we've made a bad decision. So the idea that you frame the problem and then give them consequences from that problem, and then I think the direct ask. I'd like to spend 1 hour on this by next Tuesday. I'd like 4 people to be in the room with me, please. That's the other piece of the puzzle. And then if they're here in the conference, then you can also say, Steve said I should. And so, and I'm coming. Usually I just give a speech and I run away, but I'm going to be here all year, so I'm coming to get you. And so you might as well, give up right now and play along.
Thank you.
I hope that helps.